Hi Year 11, welcome to our next lesson on intercultural communication. Today we'll be looking at the role of communication in maintaining social relationships and social control. So just for reference, here's our syllabus again. We've done dot point 1, we've done dot point 2, and today we're looking at dot point 3, this one here, about social relationships and social control. So if you're looking for a heading for your books, here it is. Social relationships are really important, and I think we all know that, particularly during lockdown. We know that it's important to have interaction with other people, and communication is really what facilitates that relationship. Communication helps to inform, persuade, motivate, and maintain relationships that we already have existing. Society really depends on the ability of members to get along, and if members don't get along, conflict occurs. Previous civilizations have collapsed because of a loss of social relationships, which has led to internal conflict. Basically, loss of control of your citizens comes from a lack of unity, which comes from a lack of social relationships. This disunity can come from disagreement on social issues, it can come from misunderstandings, it can come from inequitable access to resources, but communication is the main tool used to try and overcome that and unite the community. Communication to do this can be formal or informal, can be verbal, non-verbal, but really we want to use communication methods to control those that want to cause disruption or take away that sense of belonging that the rest of the community feels. What exactly is social control? Social control is all about regulating people's behaviour so that they behave in a way that society thinks is acceptable in social settings. We do this through regulating and enforcing norms, things that we think are natural and normal. For example, I would really hope that you don't sit around in public and pick your nose because we don't think that's socially acceptable. It's not a social norm. We use institutions to help us do this. Institutions like the police, the courts, the media, schools, governments, and we do this to try and make sure that people conform at both an individual and a group level. Because as a society, we like conformity because it means we can plan for what people are going to do because we know how they're going to behave. With conformity comes social order. Those that don't conform cause social disorder, and that's when consequences need to come into play to make sure that people are accountable for their actions. People that displace society's social order can be seen as outcasts, and they are treated poorly by other members of society due to their choices. Individuals and groups impose sanctions to help maintain that social order, and these sanctions can be communicated verbally or non-verbally through things like signage, posters, looks, it could be comments, it could be fines issues. There's lots of different ways that institutions and individuals help to perform sanctions. From a government's perspective, these are the main reasons that they want social control to be enacted. They like to maintain traditional order because we have this feeling of threat if anything to do with the traditional hierarchy or the way things have normally been done is threatened. We don't like the thought of loss of culture or things changing. People are quite stagnant and they have this almost inertia when it comes to change. They don't really like it. Individualism is not a good thing in a government's eyes. People that are too individual are seen as rule breakers. We like a collective identity that gives a collective mindset where the general rule is that people as a group will do the right thing. We like to establish social unity so that people feel part of a group, that they have trust and they can develop a sense of togetherness so that they're working towards the same goal. Think COVID restrictions. Social sanctions are consequences which allow individuals to show approval or disapproval in response to somebody's actions, knowing that they're protecting social norms. So people don't feel bad doing this. They don't feel bad making a comment on a Facebook post. They don't feel bad giving somebody a look in a supermarket if they're not wearing a mask. These are the sort of things that we deem to be methods of social control to try and make sure people are conforming to our group's collective response to a problem. So our methods of social control can be both formal and informal. Formal social controls are generally more visible and they come through institutions that have some authority and power behind them. Thinking about our course concepts there. Examples include the police issuing fines for safe speeding, the government created new legislation around drinking ages, or imprisoning convicted criminals who've been proven to do something that goes against societal norms. Informal social controls are less obvious, and they're based on the principles of shame, ridicule, exclusion, and disapproval, and they really come from within the community rather than the government level. Although, if you've been watching the press conferences recently, and idiot of the day sort of move that the police commissioner is doing for people that break COVID regulations, that's an example of a combination of formal and informal social control. Someone in a position of power and authority is making an informal statement about somebody's actions in regards to breaking the rules. Okay, time for your first bit of due work for today. So this table here shows a whole lot of different types of social control. What I'd like you to do is categorize them into the micro, meso, and macro levels of society, and then decide whether they're verbal or non-verbal. And this will be part of the due work you submit for today's lesson. Let's spend some time looking at a social control situation in action by doing a scenario. So, it's the summer holidays. The weather's really hot. All you want to do is grab your friends and go to the beach. Very northern beaches. When you get there though, you notice a lack of swimmers in the water. The lifeguards are putting up beach closed signs, and you ask a local what's happening. The lifeguards are closing the beach because a 4.5 metre shark has been spotted. Scary. What do you do though? Do you pack up and go home? Do you head to a friend's place who has a pool and do that instead? Do you sit on the beach and wait for the shark to move on? Or do you ignore the advice of the lifeguards and go for a swim anyway? Closing the beach and putting up beach closed signs is a form of social control put in place to protect people. And this is an example that the Surf Lifesaving Association and Council Lifeguards use to try and prevent lives from being lost. This situation actually took place in Newcastle in 2015 when the beach remained closed for 10 days due to shark sightings. Spokespeople from the Newcastle Council pleaded with surfers and swimmers to adhere to the warnings and advice of authorities, yet people kept swimming. So, who's responsible for their actions? This is a statement from the City of Newcastle Council. It becomes a bit of a sheep syndrome in that one surfer goes out, and then there's 3 or 5, and then there's 10, and it doesn't take long before there are a lot of people out there. It's one of those occasions where it's just not worth the risk. I'd just like to ask those board riders to cooperate with us and stay out of the water until we resolve the issue. So there's two conflicting sides here. The idea that a social control measure has been put in place, and we expect people to follow it. Some have. However, we also have this individualistic mindset of people saying, I don't care, I'm going to take the risk, and going in, and then forming a new social norm where people are following those individuals' behaviour. So, should it happen? Shouldn't it happen? Your second piece of due work for today is to consider the two sides to the situation. What do you think the opinion of the officials, the councils, the Surf Lifesaving Association, what would their opinion be about people breaking this social control? What would the individuals' opinions about this be? That they should be allowed to do what they want, they should be allowed to take their own risk, they should be allowed to do as they please. What are the two viewpoints that arise from this situation? Your last bit of due work for today, and the last thing I'll ask you to do today, is answer some questions about the scenario. This will also be uploaded as part of your due work. I'd like you to consider what you would do in this situation. Think back to those options I gave you. Would you stay at the beach and wait it out? Would you go home? Would you swim anyway? Who would be responsible if there was a shark attack? Is it the responsibility of the surf lifesavers to come and save somebody that has decided to swim against the recommendations? Or should people be left to fend for themselves? Why is that? Why are your thoughts around each answer? Are flags and signs an appropriate way of communicating the beach is closed? They're non-verbal forms of communication. Should they be verbal to go with it? Do councils and lifeguards have the right to close the beach? Think about it being a public space. Who has the right to control those areas? You might even want to consider further around the previous lockdowns we had when councils closed the beaches then to the public. Should surfers who ignore shark alarms, or swimmers for that matter, be fined? Is breaking the social rules around controls like this worthy of a criminal offence? Or should people be allowed to make their own choices and then deal with their own consequences? So, some kind of deep questions there I'd like you to think about. These all need to be submitted as due work by our lesson tomorrow, and we'll talk about them first thing. Have a great afternoon.